And not completely the end of the collaboration with Siemens Stiftung in Munich, and I'm very pleased to have also Thomas Trummer here, my partner in crime here for this 1 year long collaboration.
The pleasure's on my side.
But I want to say already a big thanks for your coming tonight, also on behalf of our dean, who already has to spend her time with our visiting committee, who is in for the next 2 days to evaluate our department. She was there at the reception, and we are also very pleased to have the Kepisch family here. This is really wonderful that you could come and see basically the works of your father and grandfather installed after we had this very interesting conversation last year. And this project, like artistic research, basically stemmed out of some discussions we had last spring when we merged, the visual arts program merged with the Center for Advanced Visual Studies. Thomas Trummer was also here visiting, and we were discussing what is kind of a shared agenda, what is the focus that we're really interested in. That is really to evaluate what is the contribution of artists on a campus that is mainly dealing with science, with innovation, etc. And are the arts just a servant to that? Do we just contribute through education? Or is artistic practice really an equal partner and a discussant on eye level with scientists, technologists? And I think that is something that brought us back to the early days when György Kepisch was hired at the Institute in 1946, and then when he inaugurated the Center for Advanced Visual Studies in 1968. And it also links us to the changes then that were made by Otto Piene when he for 20 years directed the center, to be followed by Krzysztof Wodiczko, then Steve Benton, and again Krzysztof Wodiczko. And the merger basically now that happened last year, and it's almost like the first anniversary we face today, is to bring the curricular structure, the education together with the research, with the fellows, and to really show that we are an equal unit, a laboratory like other laboratories on MIT's campus, to really discuss what is very urgent, basically to evaluate on this planet, and how can we contribute through our voice in what's going on in the world. And as we all know, I mean, one of our focus points, for example, is artistic intervention, creative responses to conflict and crisis, which is really not in an instrumentalized way contributing to discussion, but maybe the antennas that artists have, this seismographic capacity to sense when there are tensities in this world, when there are urgencies in this world, and how do we join forces with colleagues. The challenges are quite complex, and again, that's nothing new that we discover. It has been done, there have been contributions by artists more than 100 years in that way, to really understand what is on stake and how do they engage and how do they contribute and challenge, also to address those urgencies. I also want to invite Thomas to say a few words about our collaboration before I introduce tonight's speakers, and I hope Attila, who was actually the first artist in this series of installations, and we have him as the closing speaker on that. Like, you don't get bored when we say like our few sentences, but I first want to hand over also to Thomas to say a few words about our collaboration and the book project that we have in mind.
Okay, thank you, Ute. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm so glad that I can be here tonight and introduce myself and my work, and also Attila Csörgö. I'm glad that I could collaborate with Ute, which was a great collaboration, and it has been fabulous so far. And many thanks to the team, to Laura, to Martin, to Chris, and to everybody. I learned to know while I was here the last time in November, and this time again for 2 weeks. I may say something on how I met Attila, basically, because actually it was my idea to come up with Attila. Attila was not known really, although he was one of the recipients of the Nam June Paik Award, and there's a certain relationship to Nam June Paik Award to this place here. I did a show together with the Ludwig Museum in Budapest, and you are all familiar with it because Kepisch has a large show personal monographic show at this museum, which is a fabulous museum right next to the Danube River in the capital of Hungary. And this show I did together with the museum was last year. I think it was really 1 year ago. It was in April. It was called The Science of Imagination, kind of a weird title. Could be the relationship between what we imagine and what is science. Isn't science the analytical type of thinking, the notions, and imagination the controversial type of thinking, like having ideas, having hallucinations, having imaginations? Isn't this totally different types of thinking? And we were doing a show on the utopian ideas of modernism, and one central piece was La Cité by Chris Marker. And I don't want to tell you about this show, but Attila showed up at the opening, and I was at this point of time, I was already in discussion with Ute, and I said, okay, this Attila is the perfect guy for the very beginning, because there is a certain type of tradition in mathematical, geometrical thinking in Hungary that might be interesting for you here in Massachusetts. Because think of Kepes, think of Moholy-Nagy, but think also of Mr. Rubik, who actually opened this show in April last year. The Rubik's Cube. Mr. Rubik is Hungarian. And also, Attila deals with, you will see it, with very bizarre type of work. It's hard to understand, but maybe it's like this ambivalence that is articulated in the contrast between science and imagination.
It's how this project also came into place. It's like we moved last year also in the media lab, and I think it's very interesting when artists are on this campus, they are constantly confronted with scientific achievements, and the question is always, what is an artistic achievement? What is an artistic contribution? How can you validate that? How can you quantify it? And I think this actually, but also this helps us to be sharper in our proposals, because also we have to be, I think, much more self-confident and in really stating that we are also contributing to how we perceive this world. And also, if you go back, for example, I just spoke a few weeks ago with Mark Wigley, who is the dean of the architecture school at Columbia University, and we discussed the collaboration between Georgie Kepes and Kevin Lynch, and about visualizing the city and understanding the city through its visual depiction. And it was quite interesting to me to learn from Mark Wigley when he said, actually, from his perspective, he thinks there was a stronger influence from Kepes on Lynch than from Lynch on Kepes. And that was very new to me. And he said, no, to understand there's so much information in the visual, in other sensual experiences, and it's very crucial also for the science field to see what does that tell us, what do we learn from that. And today we went back also into the archive to look up early photographs of Georgie Kepes when he was dealing with scientific photography and like showing enlarged scientific imagery. What do we learn from that? What does this tell us? And I think that's really still something very interesting, and that goes beyond a utilitarian notion of what is the art. And I'm very, very glad being on this campus since a few years to really understand that scientists see it basically also the same. There is a lot of imagination on stake. It's much less rational than we always experience. They are very often in the very speculative. They have to be before they discover something new. And so there's actually much more shared than we imagine. And I think to keep up those spaces of imagination and discourse, collaboration, and really challenging each other, also a critical reflection of all of our practices is very much necessary. But with no further ado, I also want to introduce now our speaker for tonight, the artist Attila Csörgö. Attila actually uses fruit peels to demonstrate problems of space and plane geometry in his work. Like that he called also peeled spaces. Another piece, Distorted Spaces, is focusing on the photographic representation of our surroundings by using handmade cameras the images that have unusual properties and became spatial entities. He also goes back to Platonic Geometry, which is also a series of kinetic sculptures that we had shown during the fall term in a large projection and also like on a monitor. So you basically could see these geometries. They never really were static. They were in constant move, but you could not really also grasp them. And that was actually also the point of departure to discuss with Janos early photograms also of György Kepes, and we are very glad to have that now basically in the same space. And Csörgö actually applies the language of geometry and physics to traditional pre-digital age materials like sticks, strings, small electric motors to describe and reconfigure spatial relationships between objects. He follows in the footsteps actually of his compatriot György Kepes, as we all know, who has been so influential not only to the arts at MIT, but also as a collaborator of Moholy-Nagy in the new Bauhaus and in the School of Design in Chicago. And as an educator, along with his wife, Juliette Kepes. And I think it's really interesting to have two generations together under this roof. And as Thomas mentioned, Attila was also the recipient of the Nam June Paik Award in 2008, and Nam June Paik had been a fellow in the Center for Advanced Visual Studies over several years, and also my colleague Anthony Montadas is on the jury for the Nam June Paik Award since many years. So it's interesting how the strings at the end come together again here at this place. Csörgö's work has been exhibited in Europe and at the United States, and currently he's also exhibiting at the Hamburg Kunsthalle. His show is titled The Archimedean Point and will run through May this year. Today we will have Attila presenting his work, and as a respondent, I'm also very pleased to have Thomas interacting with Attila, and Thomas Trummer, with whom I co-curated artistic research, has studied art history, philosophy, and music at the University of Graz. And since 2007, he serves as the curator of visual arts at the Siemens Stiftung Munich, who is basically the sponsor of our year-long collaboration. Thomas was also visiting professor at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna, and the Hall Curatorial Fellow at the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum in Ridgefield in 2006. I know Thomas actually when he was curator for modern and contemporary art at the Galerie Belvedere in Vienna, and also like when he was a guest curator at the Grazer Kunstverein. Amongst his recent curated show is beside of the one that you see here, Before the Law at the Ludwig Museum in Cologne in 2011, Displaced Fractures at the Mikros Museum in Zurich, Switzerland in 2010, The Science of Imagination, he just mentioned, at the Ludwig Museum in Budapest, also in 2010, several silences at the Renaissance Society in Chicago, with my colleague from Documenta 11, Susan Guess, in 2009, Actors and Extras in Brussels, Belgium in 2009, the choral visual at the Casa de la Cultura in Buenos Aires in Argentina in 2009. And I'm really pleased that this collaboration is a slightly unusual one, because we are not an art museum, we are not a Kunsthalle, etc. And I'm really pleased that the Siemens Stiftung and Thomas were open to expand their engagement into the curriculum. We have one class that is focusing this term on artistic research. So this collaboration supports not only the class, it supports this lecture series and the exhibition, and also a publication that we will do together. So it is much more a multi-genre collaboration, and I'm really pleased that the Siemens Stiftung was open to that. And please let us now welcome Attila, who is suffering here already for 15 minutes.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very glad I have the opportunity to make an introduction about my works. You can see pieces from 92 to today, and they are not chronologically ordered. I try to make different combinations of works and emphasizing relations that coming from different periods, because my working method is not linear. Sometimes I go back for pieces or forgotten ideas. So I like to start the lectures with that piece there. Slanting Water is the title. And I like to do it because many problems or questions are in that black and white photography characteristic to other pieces. It's strongly related to everyday situation. We can see two glasses on a table. Something is not okay because the glass is filled with water. The level of the water is not normal, but slanting. It's not a trick. It's a photography made under unusual circumstances. It's about a revolving system. We know that the liquids, if rotated, become a parabolic surface. And I use this well-known by Archimedes. It was described many years ago. This well-known property and changed the level of the water. It has a, it can have, so it's a, as art pieces generally, it has many layers. It can have a reference to art historical pieces like the Natura Morta or the still life, but it's not still. This is it's a still life formally, but it's not still because rotating. And the last I tell the story how this idea came. It was a long night in Amsterdam, and we had conversations, but very obscure conversations about what to show. And my friend said he wanted to show the candle burning upside down. Oh, that is a very good idea. I replied, and I will show the slanting water. And I imagined the table like this and the glass like this, but the water is slanting. And I couldn't forget this idea, and 2 years later I found this solution with the revolving system. So it's I tell this story because it's sometimes I have a visionary point for the beginning, and after try to elaborate it. But this vision must be very strong. And it's a very important detail that we can't see it with our naked eye, because we can't sit at the table revolving. Probably astronauts trained for going up to the cosmos could do it. I know in the Soviet Union, astronauts were trained in these centrifuges, but it's hard. Or another glass comes into being. It's a motor-driven little system. Visitors can switch it on and off. 2 long screws are mounted to an electric motor and illuminated by a spotlight above. And it's so fast that the perception can't recognize as 2 sticks or two screws, but it makes illusion of static shape. It's a little bit vibrating, but still static enough. It's static because Once in an opening, a drunken guy poured red wine into my glass, but didn't make any damage, just it was a funny shape on the table. And you can see this line, this black line there. It's a kind of interference phenomenon. It becomes into being because the lamp is above and the inner side of the screws are always bright, outside shadowed, and from the point of view, the two things cover each other and overlapping, and this kind of interference of black line comes into being because the shadow would always cover the bright one. I thought it because later it will make new pieces. This interference phenomenon is so strongly there, but on the same side, it's so unreal, and I wanted to use this effect. Yeah, we will see later. It is a very simple technical mechanism here. It was in the beginning, I found objects around me, and I didn't have any budget or something, just I had to use the things in the environment. If I wanted to make a fast motion, fast revolving, I used the electric fan, cut the blades, and so on. If a slower one, then a record player. So it was very related to the environment. But because these objects were produced for other purposes, a game started because I had to change these machines in many details. Sometimes I could do it, sometimes not, but it was an interesting game. Or this is a non-kinetic piece, but it deals with a hidden structure, which sometimes is present in other pieces. It's a cheese with big holes, that kind of Emmentaler kind of cheese. It's 1 kilogram, it's a unit cheese. And I was curious about the holes, this whole configuration, what is inside. And I connected the holes. In the beginning, it was simple because the holes were visible, but inside there are many holes. And I tried to find them. I put long nails like searchers into the cheese, and I could feel, oops, there is something inside because of the density of the material had a different behavior. And so from different sides, I made this, and I could determine the position of these holes and injected synthetic resin inside, and then finally the whole structure of the holes became visible. So actually this is a sculpture of the lack, the absence of the cheese. And I like very much the sphere-like shapes, the spheres, and the orange was one starting point for it. And how we peel the orange is a nice game with the spherical geometry, and how can we lay out these shapes to plane. And I use these shapes in different installations. This is a construction drawing for spiralically constructed ball. And then I combined these things with the levitation. I was also very interested in floating, but I didn't have access to big electromagnetic fields, so I tried to use electric fans. And I prepared the blowing air in that way that they could kept balls in the air. So simply, it's a harmonization of the air current going up and the gravitation which attracts the ball. And if it's good proportionally combined, then the ball can float there. And then making this test, realized that the different balls, different structured balls, have different motions. So some of them are jumping very fast, others are sometimes fall down. And of course the draft is the crucial problem, and the people who want to touch these balls, they can't resist the temptations of some of them. They are very fragile. And the text is not important, it's just environment. So as a mechanism, it's very simple, but it was a long way to achieve this thing, because the shape of the balls, how the weight, how thick the paper should be, all the electric fan, all these things are have an effect or impact on floating. And this piece goes back to the first one because it's with liquid too, but it's oil, an engine oil. And it has a relation to the American culture because the starting point was Edgar Allan Poe short story. Descent to the Maelstrom is the title of the story. And it's a fantastic, beautiful description about a big whirlpool at the Norwegian coast, which is very dangerous, of course, and only one fisherman could escape from the vortex. And the description about huge black, ebony black, shiny, curved, this is important, this curved surface was very influential for me. And I made a small version of it, a domestic vortex. It's a big pot which is used for industrial kitchen, and I put it on a rotating disc. The visitors can switch it on and off as they want. And as the speed increasing, the surface is changing to parabolic and deeper. And because the oil is dark, almost black, it's a used oil. stinky a little bit. It reflects very well. So it's a moving reflection. It's a moving mirror image what we can see there. So here you can see better what is the motion. Not every surroundings is good. Those buildings are good having a big area around and details, architecture details. Otherwise, not so good reflections appear. So here you can see this little circle inside. This is the reflection of the outer world, out of the beam. And all the others are the inner reflections, the reflections of the reflection. So we can go down into the vortex by the mirror images, therefore it's not so dangerous as at pole. But it shows very well how the non-Euclidean geometry on this parabolic surface appears as the curvatures, as the lines become curvatures and so on. It's in the Hamburg Kunsthalle. I have this show recently. And this roof with this glass tiling is very nice because it's like an op art effect functions. These parabol mirrors have strange properties because if it's not so deep, then it gives a magnified image. It's like the shaving mirror. And then there is a certain point, the image disappears, and then after it's getting deeper, on the contrary, it's the image is getting smaller and smaller. It's a piece with magnetism. So I try to use different physical forces, like magnetism here and liquids rotated. And this is a record player. I have a small linkage on it with a moving magnet. And on the right, there is a standing magnet. And if it's in motion, no. The centrifugal force drives the magnet outwardly. It would rotate on a circle, but then the standing magnet pushes back into the inner field. So this is the base of the mechanism. And or from another point of view, you can see what is the repulsion, repulsion. I don't know the correct word. And above this, this is a explanation. Above this, I set a sheet of glass and put magnetic powder So it's a kind of very fine material. These black magnets are pressed from this material. It's not magnetic itself, but can be easily magnetized. And as the moving magnet makes these trajectories, it becomes visible in this powder. So it's always changing. It's making a continuous drawing, or what, or it redraws itself. So it's not the same. There are characteristic motions, but not always changing. So drawing machine is the title. And so it has a kind of random effect. And I was interested in this thing that a machine draws something which is so irregular. And we could see long, long lines. So they are very time related. So many minutes can be seen in one drawing. And in several pieces, I photographed that kind of motions. It's not my photo, but I like it because the moon over Alaska in 3 hours leaves this long stripe. And it's a quite abandoned place. So the biggest action is the moving moon above the settlement. Or these so-called analemnas, and this on the right is if every day we make a photo from the same point at the same time of the sun, we got this shape. Or the famous French photographer, inventor, so pioneer of the film too, Attila Csörgö. His photos were very important for me. So the motion, if we can see a motion in the longer extension, not just one single shot as a frozen time, but in the continuity. It's about the water waves photography. Now, so this is an additional thing, but in a certain sense, I followed this kind of way in photography. And this is my photo. This is the famous curvature from the cycloids. It's a family of curvatures. If we roll a wheel on a surface, one point makes this curvature. And I mounted the headlamp of the bicycle to the front wheel and pushed, and this curvature, of course, appeared. So I like this combination of the real environment and an abstract idea as this cycloid or epicyclos together appear. Or the same headlamp mounted to a football, and we throw it in 5 minutes around at sunset. So this is like a radiation or what between two people. And I made it more systematically, so I made different moving structures, kinetic sculptures, but they have photo versions or photographic approaches too, because documenting the pieces, I realized how big is the difference to the scene object and the photographic representation. And then I exaggerated it and made more and more photos with different exposures. And so about the same object, moving object, they are different photos because they are long exposure photographies, and they can't see long, yeah, or shutter has a certain speed, but the camera can do, so it can register a longer motion as one continuous thing. So here I didn't wait so long as the whole hemisphere appeared. It has a cup and a belt, or I don't know what. And here I wait so long that the whole structure became visible. So they are just motions, not real spatial objects. But it is a question: what is real sculpture? Where is the boundary of a moving structure? All these things, what it can move around, is the moving sculpture. I think so. And then I used for other, it's a more complicated piece where I combined 3 different motions, making a growing effect, like a spiralic ball increasing to a certain diameter and decreasing. So it's a pulsating structure. The 3 rotations are placed. And here I photographed 2 different ball size on the same slide. Here I photographed continuously. It was in the middle point, the little lamp, and as it reached the final extension, it was a continuous photo, so it made a dense effect. This is almost solid. And here I combined with the environment, which time to time appear in the studio, that the objects cover everything, because it was a good counterpoint to this abstract shape ball. It's like an eternal shape, and this rubbish in the studio. And now you can see a set of pieces going back to this interference phenomenon I explained with the 2 screws rotating fast. So this is also a kind of interference. I calculated curvatures deriving from regular shapes, like here from a triangle. And if people can see it in a switch on and off position too, and if it's switched on, the cooperation of the 2 disks make this certain regular shape. But if it's switched off, they doesn't have any resemblance to regular shapes. And I like these 2 opposite things, that something can be realized as a regular one from a certain point of view, but then if common action or collaboration of the disk happen, then something regular comes into being. And I use this for different shapes, all geometrical, of course. like a circle. So no one could predict, seeing this switched off set, what is the reason for these curvatures. Or the most complicated looks like this, and it makes an infinity sign. And there is a third one, because these three, the fourth one, because before these three had the equal speed. But here there is a little difference of the speed. And I calculated for the speeds of the disk, of course. I calculated for a triangle, but this little speed difference had an effect that the crossing were differently happen. Not at the same places happened, but the little shift. And therefore, a little film about, little movie about triangle happened. So periodically it appears and disappears. And now a big set of works is coming with the Platonic shapes, Platonic solids, and the regular solids of the geometry. There are only 5 solids like this, and the first description from the history is from the Greek philosopher. And there are simple interrelations among the solids and concerning the number of the edges, for example. That from 2 tetrahedra we can make 1 cube or an octahedron. And I used these properties and made kinetic structures where this metamorphosis happened. The first one was this 2 tetrahedra making 1 cube piece. I used very simple mechanical solutions, but it was a long process. I couldn't accomplish it at the first attempt, and I had to give up for a year, but then new ideas and I don't know what came, and a new pressure for exhibition, and then I could accomplish. Very simple materials from the studio. I used weights, I used like screws for weights and so on, and the pulleys what I found. So concerning the materiality is simple, but the combinations are not so simple. That was an important point. And it has a title, Platonic Love. And so in the beginning, I was focused only this transformation, that there are 2 regular scenes, and something connects them. It's a temporal connection, and I didn't know how it would happen. And later, this intermediate phase became more, not more, but somehow very important. So this disordered or chaotic character became important, and it's related to this disk that we can see 2 stages with different character, but they are somehow the same thing. And here the 2 regular scenes and this shape in between, what we don't know what it was. Somehow it's the same story. So it's a alternative addition. So here the two tetrahedra making another shape, octahedron. Of course, they are quite little pieces, and or the sticks are little. Sometimes the environment is big, but so around this size, and so the connections must be small. So it's quite fragile, and time to time there are technical problems. So they are like plants, flowers, home need care, and sometimes I have to change the strings. The friction is so that was important, that these different motions, because it's combining a lot of motions at the same time. I could solve with one single motor, not with many motors, because then another synchron problem would have appeared, but with a single one.
Did you ever think of using monofilament, like fish line?
Similar. It's actually for shoes. I found, because a fishing line is a little bit elastic, yeah. But what I found is for sewing the shoes, it's not elastic. That was the best one. This is a bigger one. This is the biggest one. Yeah, here 3 solids making one. It's an animation. It's not so fast, but yeah. One critic wrote it was a Platonic puppetry, and some a little bit like this. And there are many other works bit related to the cartography, or how we show the surface of complicated objects, or not complicated, because sometimes like the sphere is not complicated, but there is another problem, that it can't be laid out to plane perfectly, because the two-dimensional and the three-dimensional geometry don't fit in this case. And as we showed, we can see in different maps, the Earth can be distorted very, very different way in different maps. This is a drawing from Agnes Denes about the cube globe. What I like, this is a Qantas Australian airways. Sydney is the middle of the Earth, of course, and it's a very strange but beautiful shape of the globe. And they are all evident methods, but somehow the accents or the point of the middle point and the way of representing the Earth that makes this diversities of maps. And this is my map about the soccer ball. And I like, it is a very simple method of cartographic method used in the 16th, 17th century. So it's simple to, easy to calculate. Not so complicated equations there are. And I like that how these pentagonal shapes of the ball are distorted. In the North Pole or in the South Pole, they are not pentagonal anymore, or just in a and the orange peeling I have mentioned was very important because this is the same problem from the kitchen. So it's a playful method for the representation of a spherical entity. And if we cut out these shapes, so I reversed the method. I calculated these planar shapes, and if we cut out and stick together, then we get sphere-like, spherical approaches, and but with different resolutions. But I was curious about the other shapes. Okay, in the case of the cube, it's simple. We cut some edges and then lay out like here. It can have different shapes, so the method is not evident, but it's simple. If we have holes in the cube, then we get a strange interior space like this crossing. And if we want to peel this surface, we must go into this hole, and because I wanted to lay out the whole surface, and the inner one and the outer one as well, because it's the same continuous thing. And yeah. On the right, you can see the whole surface of this cubus with hole. But it's a bit of a trial and error method. So I had to fix these cutting lines, peeling lines on that cube. There are several possibilities, but it's enough to find one. And because without this preparation, the shape would, well, the surface would fall into many, many different independent shapes, and it was not a good solution. I wanted to keep it in one because the surface was 1, 2, so. And the other typical problem can appear that one part of the planar shape covers the other part. And this is not good, of course, because it's multi-layered, so not one plane anymore. If these two, this is the axiomatic, if these two things are avoided, then the solution is good. And after, we can reverse the whole thing and considering this shape as a plan for a spatial entity. And so I use this peeling method for different things. So before you could see an abstract model, but later I used it for architectural elements. It is a hypothetical little building, but I took motifs from the city. It was in New York during a residency. I like these ziggurat-like skyscrapers because, yeah, they have so many parts, and with the normal method of cutting up the edges, this laying out won't be possible. So this is the flat version. So this is the same shape, but looks very differently. And that was interesting for me, the same and the different in a certain sense. Now this is a real model, the Western Union building, and more or less proportionally modeled with a neighbor building and with a little parking kiosk. So it's a bigger environment from the city, emphasizing that we could build the whole city, just a question of patience. That is. And in an exhibition situation, it looks like this, that I try to show all the different details, different approaches of the piece. And the photos, the paper piece itself, and the sketches. And this is a relation to the art, still life. It's a bottle of wine with glass and apple. This black is the wine in the glass. It's a Pinot Noir or some dark. And there is a hollow space in the bottle, so I had to go in to the bottle. So this is a slice from the side that you can see that in the bottle there is a hollow room. But many tests needed. And this is the whole construction. And now these self-made cameras are coming, and they all deal with a different kind of photography about environment. And the photos normally are plain, and they shows only a little section of the space. And I was not very content with this. I wanted to have a larger photo, a larger image about the space, and I wanted to have spatial images, actually, spherical images. Somehow in this way that as we looking around, but we can with the eyes also capture a part of the space, so we must turn the head, and we can do it systematically, spiralically, and then as one continuous motion it happens. And the other thing that we are always in the space, so the space is around us. It becomes important in the images later because sometimes we can see on these photos the space from an other point of view from outside. And for the first camera, the semi-space camera called, that was the most simple in the system. To a fiberglass hemisphere, I could photograph the upper part of the space. So it was a connection between the half of the space and the hemisphere. It's geometrically, it's a simple connection that we fixed the middle point of the hemisphere, and every point in the space can determine one point on the surface of the hemisphere. And I had to make a camera which was possible to make it in a photographic way. And other very problematic questions arose, questions of the chemistry, because I had to cover these hemispheres with photographic emulsion. And in the beginning, I was afraid of the optical things and the motion, but they worked very well. But this chemistry not. It didn't want to stay on, and sometimes it came down in the photographic liquid developer, and so like photo jellyfish, it was in the tongue. And it's a very long process. And then I had to dilute the emulsion with gelatin. And so it lost the sensitivity partly. It was not so sensitive anymore. Then the exposure time increased incredibly. So these things were not so user-friendly, let's say. 4 hours are the exposures in sunny weather. And it's not sure that, never can be sure that the photograph is good. So it's a little bit like the pioneers of the photos. They went to the mountains, the Rocky Mountains or Himalaya. They had set up tents, and they developed the glass sheets in these tents. So it is a kind of relation to this. And it has a strange property. So it's like a black and white slide, transparency. It's on a illuminating table. And so what I mentioned, that we are always in the space. This is front and behind. But looking at these photos, you can see both sides because it's transparent, and the point of the photography was in the middle of that hemisphere. And what you see on that side and this side, they were opposite sides. You understand? Yeah, good. So it is a kind of visual property what we can't see normally. So this is the camera, and of course there is a black wrap on it. Now it's opened. Many little problems appeared, but so for example, this is a spiralic motion. It's not good if you use the same speed for the exposure because the circumference is not the same, so it doesn't have the same amount of light on the spots. So I had to change the speed. I made lots of calculations that what kind of speed should rotate our structure having the same amount of light on the circumferences. But of course, there are other problems that the light in 3-4 hours can change the in the sky, the clouds coming and the sun and so on. So I had to measure all the time the light, amount of light in the space, and to harmonize these two things. And I wanted to combine the orange peeling with the orange space photography on a spiralic stripe, like an orange space, having almost the entire space around. Actually, this is the camera. Only the top and the bottom, there are two black spots having no image about the space because of this technical connections. But all the other parts of the space around are on the photo. It was far more complicated as the camera before, because on the top you can see this little image that, okay, the system would be simple. We can make these geometrical lines and connections, but it's photographically impossible because the other part of the sphere closes the light. So, yeah, no image inside would occur. So I used a different way, a different method. I used a single lens, which, so there is a virtual sphere of the sharpness. And as the photographic sphere, as an orbiting sphere, was connected to this virtual sharpness sphere. And so in this way, I could photograph the whole environment. But many, many synchron problems appeared. It gives a quite good image. Despite of this low technology I used. Of course, it's no magnified photo or such a problems would happen. It's a 1-to-1 size. So. So here you can see that the image is continuous on the surface. And I made several spots photographs, but it's always a challenge. Yeah, and it's in other Cambridge, in England. I had an exhibition there. And the third camera is the Möbius space camera. It's based on the Möbius strip. And this is the camera. And it has a motion, it has a system of so-called slit camera. It sees only in one line, as the scanners, for example, nowadays from the digital equipments. But originally this photo camera was invented for horse races, and it saw only the finish line, and it could, because the horses are very fast, people couldn't see who was the first, and this camera helped to see it, and so it sees it only in one line, and the film must move behind this line. And so there is a relative connection of speeds, two speeds, the horses and the moving film. So this camera is based on that system. And it has a motion, maybe I'll show it, this is the best one, that in the beginning the camera is looking that way, this is the line, the gap seeing, and making one turn, and this aperture is upside down in the end. So it has an effect that the same scene, the same environment is in front of the camera, but upside down. And on the photo you can see that the same motifs are on both sides, but one is upside down. And if it's on a transparent material, then you can connect the ends with a half twist, and then it makes a continuous image. And this is on it. And but in this way, a Möbius strip comes into being. So there is the photography, which is normally doing two-dimensional images about the three-dimensional space. And then there is the Möbius strip, which has a kind of one-dimensionality. And all these things together were a bit so fighting with each other. That was important. I can use the camera from my car, from the battery, so it's good. But the weather is always a problem. The rain. So this was this exhibition and award what Thomas mentioned, this Nam June Paik, and I show it because it has a it's a special situation. It was the exhibition was in Museum, Városliget's Museum in Cologne for old art, and I got a space in the 17th century Dutch painting room, and in another room where old equipments, telescopes, camera obscuras were from the same age. And it was a very unusual situation. Normally, contemporary artists exhibit with contemporary artists, and not with old masters from Franz Hals or that kind of old masters. And because these questions with art and science and looking forward and the technological innovations, it's quite general, and we can find many exhibitions and examples based on it. But this relation to the old things happens quite rarely, I think. But it's functioned well. So that was the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Attila. I think I'm not the only one who is stunned by your capabilities to imagine spatial relationships and also moving relationships. I don't want to bother you too much. I was just thinking about your idea of having, of not having the representation of still lives, because you, one word came into my mind when I was listening to you. Would you agree if we called your type of work still light, kind of, not really painting, but I had really trouble to understand a lot of it, to be honest. But what I could figure out was two things: that something which is stable and solid in so-called usual arts, like in painting or sculpture, gets into motion in your thinking, and what's moving becomes solid, stable, and fixed. Is this correct? So that you always try to move something which is stable and stop something which moves?
It's correct. Yeah, that kind of attitude is correct. Therefore, I gave this title for the lecture, that turning out the space. So it's, of course, it must be seen metaphorically. And so finding that kind of point of view, the things have from that point, the things show a different order, a different arrangement, different character, unexpected sometimes.
Yeah, Ute and I, we are going to have trouble to put your pieces into the catalog, right, or into the book we are planning. But Ute has always smart ideas. Maybe she has one to you know, because the representation of, for example, the Platonic solids in images is almost impossible, because we have to follow the, you know, as you said, you know, there's one stable construction of a Platonic solid moving into the other one. But what is interesting is this shifting situation, because we are unable, I am unable, to be honest, I'm unable to figure out what is happening. You know? And to your remark that using Fisherman's line, or how you call it, I saw it actually in reality, and it's really needed that you see the strings, because that's astonishing that you see the strings working. It's like building little sailboats, you know. It's basically the same, but sailboats, they're really moving. You know?
I think you should be in contact with a local performance group called the Mobius.
Yes, Mobius group.
The Mobius group. They're a performance group that's been around for 20 years. Many different media.
I'll put you in contact with them if you can give me some way to contact you.
Yes,
Thank you. Myself, I have a music degree from Brandeis. I graduated 30 years ago. I studied composition and arranging and conducting and musicology. And also my mother published poetry, Warthog Press. open mics in New Jersey and in Manhattan, and I read at Stone Soup Poetry. That's where I'm going after this. And my wife's Deborah Cash. She was a dance critic at the Globe until everybody got laid off by the Times. So we're in the middle of the arts. And there's a lot of performance artists that would love your work, especially those. There's a guy who specializes in John Cage and these sorts of things. It would be a delight.
Oh, thanks. Once I made a stage piece for a dance group in Slovenia, and it was interesting collaboration. These Platonic structures, but a simple one in a tetrahedron. It moved above the stage, but the weights came down, and the dancers could hit accidentally or as they want, if they wanted to, and it made a shaking effect for the whole piece. And yeah, and then in the end, accidentally it fell down.
But isn't it also like what you try to do, that it's the opposite of creating a mystical presence? It's much more like showing how the things work, trying to understand how things work. And I think that is very much shared with scientists. They discover something and then they try to understand how is it working, how is it constructing, and then remodeling it. And this is what I see very much as a shared kind of approach. Yes. To understanding something. And I think so the fishing string would hide it, and I think the strings that you see make you understand how the mechanism works, and I think that's the real beauty of it. And I don't know if I get it wrong or...
Yeah, no. I wanted to make transparent system, so nothing is hidden. It's just ugly thing to hide the important things. And I'm convinced that it gives more if it's an open system, as if we want to keep secrets. And yeah.
I think there's a big difference. Sorry for interrupting you. I think your remark with John Cage is interesting because there's a difference between you and John Cage's approach. Insofar as I see it, as you are interested in hollows, and Cage is interested in void. So Cage wants to find what's the nothingness around us. Yeah, what's the nothingness in terms of a phenomenological approach towards the world, or to how we sense the world. And you are interested in defining hollows as something which exists. So it's not the non-existing; it's the existing. You substitute the hollows of a cheese and the hollows of the cube by having something. So you substitute it through objects. So maybe you have a fear of what Cage wanted to have.
I guess my question would center on what would you say is the essence of the artistic expression? Specifically, I felt myself, I perceive two categories. One is motion, the kinetic, action. And on the other, just the pure technology, a very crisp, crystalline. And I thought, maybe a couple of photographs of the icicle, phenomenological situation of icicles with the morning sunrise would sort of work with your kind of thing. And I thought, well, the sailboat, which you brought up, I think, was another good analogy. But I really did, certainly did enjoy it. I think there is really definitely a very good high level of quality and energy in the pieces. But again, coming back to this question is, what would you say could you sort of say what's the poetic essence of the pieces that you've aspired.
This, how did you say, crispy materiality, or what? It was always important, and this, so it's a kind of dual approach or duality thinking. That on the one hand there are these shapes of geometry. They are like ideas distilled by big thinkers or a lot of people during the many years, and they are very constant, more or less, much more constant than other things of the ideas. So little changes. Okay, there are non-Euclidean and Euclidean geometries. The triangles are different in these systems, but yeah. And I felt that if I use these things, the best way is to do with this poor appearance, poor materials. It was in the beginning necessity, but I tried to make a virtue of it. So, because these things as crashing, I think it's good that complex ideas can be shown with simple tools. So something like that.
Yeah, it's just so striking that each and every piece that you showed, I had the chance to work on within a totally different context in working with scientists who tried to understand how children and people and scientists of different ages make sense of the kinds of phenomena that you show. So, for example, the one with the water, there are many experiments that have been done where you try to understand how children develop a sense, or what the genesis of the sense of this permanency of the behavior of liquids that puts itself constantly in this state, independent of the orientations of the containers, or trying to understand how people represent the movement of the cycloid, and I could go on and on, the relative motion and so on. What strikes me with your work is that you show what was always almost intentionally hidden by the scientists. Because it took, in a way, somebody who had the vision almost of these movements and how these work, but in a way, they were always translated immediately back into the formula. And we were the proletarians at the time in this research lab, so we had to create situations in which we try to understand how the kids see, for example, the phenomenon of the waters, how they behave, and so forth. And I think that at least one of the layers of the beauty of your work is that it brings to the fore, they have to go away, they have to be peeled off. And they have to go away, they have to be peeled off. And the question now, because the question is, I find it extraordinary that you actually build these machines and don't just use a computer to simulate some of these behaviors that normally we reconstruct in our minds. And I just would like you to talk even more about why you choose this huge work and to show these mechanisms. Yeah, without, I would like to almost say, falling into the trap of just using Maya. Right. Because in a way you could do much of this work, and people do it, but it doesn't at all have the
I was feeling so close to the same feeling that it's the imperfections, it's the way it's not perfect. And the slightly shaking sticks, somehow this gives us the humanity which we've lost in so much, I think, because of the computer in some ways, that this is what the artist can bring. It's a sensitivity to those things which are not, or are imperfect, and thereby give them life.
The fragility.
It seems to me like the room is talking a lot about how science looks at something and disassembles it, like looks at nature, I should say, and disassembles it, and you then sort of look at the science and then reassemble it back into nature, is so, and the technology. So I guess the thing I'm curious about is like, what's your emotional connection to technology? Like, how do you feel about technology?
This is.
But you know, like a few words, like just a few, like what's your gut kind of emotional feelings about technology?
It's a very complex question, because there are parts in the technology is our nature environment. No, so that's it. But there are fearful things. There are playful things. There are many different things that make us optimistic about future technology. But the other things are not at all. So it's a very controversial question. It's probably the most important question today, this relation to the technology. It's like as you use the cell phones. If it's ringing too much, it's horrible. But if I lost the connection, then I feel lost too. And it's ambivalent, very ambivalent. I have never had the opportunity to use complicated technology. And I don't know what would have happened if 10 years, 15 years ago I would have the access. Now I find it was good like this. I could solve a lot of problems without that in a different way, just like struggling face to face with the problem, and it's like a duel. And if I achieved the problem, that was very fine. Sometimes I couldn't. So there are a lot of projects I couldn't realize, but okay.
So I have a question that maybe connects a little bit to Professor Ackerman's question about why you chose not to use any digital media, and a little bit about the first comment, which had to do about the depiction of how you depict your work, and how it really doesn't, you can't really get a sense of it through any one medium. You have to see it as a long exposure in some settings. You have to see it in person. You can see it as a photograph. You can see it as a video. And I'm really curious if you've been thinking much about more contemporary media, like YouTube is now pervasive, and a number of your works work with the this kind of moire effect or rates of motion, and you have persistence of vision, right, which is like 24 frames a second, or computer screens which are going at 60 hertz. And have you thought at all about how your sculptures maybe interact with these other things which are also operating cyclically as visual presentation?
Sorry, I didn't understand very well the question. Could you repeat?
Okay, so, well, video, when we look at a video, it's typically 24 or 30 frames a second. And a lot of your sculptures are in motion, and you're using, I'm thinking of your two rotating cyclical discs, which form an image out of their, I guess the pattern of their rotation, the cyclical combination of those two cycles. And I'm just wondering if you've thought at all about using video as a core way of depicting your work, because you use time-lapse photography, still images, but I could imagine that you could create other forms of looking at your sculpture through the actual attributes of a video and how it's operating at 30 frames a second, or a film at 24, or something like that.
No, I have never used video just for documentation, and these pieces are related to that videos or film sequences, and actually they have a lot to do with this filming approach, but I think more like in the time of the pioneers of this technology. And because if a screen is a very simple thing, but it makes a kind of distance to the viewer. But if a motion, like in the case of the disk, happens in front of you, and you can see it also to the side, so as an object you can see it, and you can understand the system. It is different as seeing a screen. And probably the basic things can be better shown. I hope. And the effect for the viewer, I hope too, can be stronger, let's say. Because in the next time it shows something, and then it reveals what it happened at the same time. But it doesn't undermine the whole thing. So the effect can stay strong enough. Is it?
Well,
Is
that
it
makes
a
sense.
good answer?
No, you were talking about transparency earlier,
Yeah.
so it makes a lot of sense to keep the depiction of it not as central to how you understand the work. But thank you.
I think this goes in the right direction, but just like wrapping it up, I just want to say it's very similar, basically, like to really make it transparent. I understand like the video for you is a tool, like how to show how it's functioning, and then we see it basically the work in all its iterations. Like we just don't have the original machine there. Like even if you see the machine in the exhibition, you don't need a video because you have the machinery that you see how it's constructed. And I still would like to say that this is to me very shared, like then if you go in some of the science labs here where people still work with basic models, like it's actually not so much computers than we imagine. There's a lot of laboratories where people really try to have a hands-on practice of understanding how things are functioning. And it's this kind of, there's a construction, deconstruction kind of movement going, like when we try to grasp something. And this is what I saw very much shared, why we did this exhibition project and this collaboration, to basically see what is shared from an artistic approach of understanding, constructing, deconstructing something versus a scientific understanding. And we see this with you more in mathematical forms, like as you said, in also like this kind of constructions, but we saw it like recently we had Jerem Lee there who understands like even like the effects of formaldehyde, like how mushrooms can deconstruct the effects, like so we had very different approaches to scientific phenomena and how artists deal with it and how scientists deal with that. And I think that was basically what interested us in putting this series together, like just to juxtapose artistic practices and scientific practices in many different methodologies. Like, I mean, like, and to me, even like if we use theory, for example, even theory tries to construct, deconstruct something that is happening. So the material and the immaterial are not so far apart, actually. So when we talk about the void and the holes and the visible and the invisible, the material, the non-material, they're actually the same at the very end. Yeah, so it's not so different. And I think your work also makes this very visible in a very philosophical way, although it looks so simple. It's actually not. And I also want to use the opportunity, because we had a very long day with the reception and the exhibition. I also want to mention, like, this closing session today, I also want to thank the artists who are not here, because we invited them over time, so they came one after the other. So I really also want to thank Jerem Lee, who contributed her research on mushrooms and how they basically can deal with formaldehyde pollution, the Infinite Burial project, like, which also a very metaphorical project, also Fajvovic and Goldberg, who deal with the phenomena of meteorites. They're older than this planet, and with having response from Professor Binzel, who is in Earth atmospheric planetary research and deals with the same meteorites from a scientific approach. And also we had, with Jerem, we had Professor Ashford, who deals on a legal matter and like from the position of chemistry with formaldehyde effects. And also when we had Laurent Grasson here dealing with the HARP labs, the ionization of air and like how scientists deal with that. And so I think this kind of juxtaposing artists with technologists and scientists and have this kind of shared dialogue, have a collision really, and see what even comes out of that meeting was what we had in focus in this term. And I want to thank everybody who contributed over the last months to that, including our students who at the moment deal with the archive, the CAVS archive, but also everybody in the team of ACT to contribute to that series. And I think both Thomas and Attila and also our guest deserve now a little break. We had a very long day today, and I just want to indicate that on Friday we have a collaboration with the Transcultural Exchange Conference that will take place over the weekend here in Boston and a little bit in Cambridge, and we will have at 1:30 here in Bartos Theater a conference talking about artistic residencies in university contexts and what is the benefit. So we have guests from around the world who also host artistic residencies in different universities. And to those who are interested what our fellows are doing recently, at 3:30 we have a Pecha Kucha with our ACT fellows to introduce their ongoing research. Nitin Sawhney sits up there, Elizabeth Goldring is here, and Pelin Tan, I think, is here. So our recent fellows will talk a little bit about like their ongoing practice as current residencies at our unit. So you're welcome to that. And in the evening, our students, our graduates, have an open lab situation in the Venus lab in the Maki building, where most of you just have been, which is kind of a interactive drawing session. So you're also welcome to that. And that basically lasts over 3 days on the weekend. So there's still a lot going on. And I want to thank Thomas for the collaboration, Attila for giving us his work over the last months, and tonight basically revealing a lot to me also, like when I saw the peeled. I didn't know how exactly the machinery worked to that, so thank you for that. And thanks for being here this week with us, and I thank you all for coming. I want to thank the Kappisch family for loaning us the work of Georgi Kappisch, which really is wonderful to have on display at the moment, to understand more on his experiments with light, his experiments with Polaroid and photograms, which links very nicely to Attila's work. And I also want to thank Otto and Elizabeth for coming tonight, Otto Pine, and who also worked a lot with sky art. And it was interesting to see your work in the sky connecting. So I think it's really interesting to see also an ongoing effort with different generations. And I thank you all for staying tuned to our Monday night series, and I hope I see you back basically in fall for our next series. So thanks for coming.